By the middle of the 19th century, Richard Wagner, the composer of this music, had taken over from Beethoven as the emblematic figure of European intellectual life. Like Beethoven, Wagner's music and thinking is steeped in Romanticism, but there's been a big change. Whereas Beethoven was grounded in the world of Greek mythology and pan-Europeanism, still in many ways a man of the Renaissance, and definitely of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, Wagner, on the other hand, is a romantic nationalist, and his music and operas are based on the folk myths of the German people. In 1848, that was both problematic and provocative, because Germany was not a country. The German-speaking people were divided up between about 40 different states, some of them quite small, but some of them quite large, like Prussia, Austria, and Bavaria. As a trenchant anti-nationalist such as Metternich, the power in Austria, the man who ran the multiracial Austrian Empire, might have thought of it, the Germans had caught the virus of nationalism from the French during the Napoleonic occupation. Now in 1848, this patchwork of German mini-states was dominated in the south by Austria. Austria itself was a larger entity, and within the Austrian borders there were the Czechs, the Poles, Romanians, Italians, and many other nationalities. The German-speaking people of the Austrian Empire were to the north of the Austrian Empire, but to the south of what we would now think of as Germany. The North Germans were either directly subject to the large Prussian state that had emerged after the defeat of Napoleon, or were dominated by Prussia. So you had a German national ethno-linguistic nation divided between many different jurisdictions and divided really between the Prussian Empire in the north, which was predominantly German, although it had a lot of Polish citizens in what was called East Prussia, and this ethno-linguistic German nation was dominated in the south by an entirely multiracial empire, the Austrian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The idea from the French Revolution of the sovereign people, we the people who govern ourselves, was anathema to the Austrian Empire, because it would mean not only losing its German population to some putative German ethnic state, but the virus of nationalism, if it spreads to the Hungarians, the Romanians, the Poles, the Italians, would lead to a complete disintegration of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That eventually happened. It was really the main cause of the First World War. And at the end of the First World War, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was broken up into numerous small successor nation-states, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and so on. But in 1848, the Austrians in particular, but supported by Prussia and Russia, the three powers of the Holy Alliance, absolutely determined to stop any sort of national rising to form a German state. Ranged against them in 1848 was an alliance of nationalist and liberal intellectuals mainly, and people from the middle classes, who gathered in Frankfurt and proclaimed a national parliament or a national assembly for all the German people, regardless of whether they were in the north ruled over by Prussians or in the south ruled over by Austrians. The Frankfurt Assembly proclaimed a German nation-state, which would be democratic and which would send MPs from all parts of Germany. It adopted, like the French, a tricolour instead of the old imperial standard or the old feudal banners. Tricolour was not red, white and blue, as in the case of France, but black, red and gold, and that is still the national flag of Germany today. The Germany of the Frankfurt Assembly in 1848 was a fatherland. It was a racial or ethno-linguistic homeland for anybody who was German. In due course, it was put down by the Austrian army, and Wagner himself was famously a lookout on the watchtower of the fort at Frankfurt as the Austrian army arrived to put down the rebellion. What's notable about German nationalism from the start is how artificial it is, in a sense. Whereas France has natural and obvious boundaries, the most problematic being its eastern boundary along the Rhine. That Rhine boundary is really the only natural boundary that Germany has, apart from perhaps the North Sea and the Alps. Germany, from Roman times and throughout the Middle Ages, had been really a geographical expression, but now it was to be Germania, the homeland of the German-speaking people. At least that was the plan of the radicals and liberals and nationalists of 1848. And because this nation was so artificial, it was the first attempt really at nation building in the modern world. England as an island, or occupying most of an island, had a kind of natural basis for its claims to nation statehood in the 19th century. It's often been argued, as does France, and in a way so does Spain on the Iberian Peninsula, and of course Italy. Germany, however, far more problematic. Who are the Germans? Where in particular is the eastern boundary and the southeastern boundary of Germania? This was to be the cause, one of the main causes of this problem of the extent of German nationalism of both the Second World War and the First World War and the Cold War. And German domination of Eastern Europe is still a hot issue within the EU today. Now, this business of synthesizing a new nation, Germany, from all these tiny little states and from the old empires, was a project. It was a specific literary, musical, cultural, romantic project. The operas of Wagner were to be crucial in this, culminating later in the century in the Ring Cycle, which is a full-scale reenactment of ancient Nordic mythology, creating a race myth, a folk myth of German separateness and German specialness. At the same time, there was the preeminent position in European philosophy of Hegel and his historicism. Now, we've looked at this before, and as we know, Hegel thought that the Prussian state represented the will of God on earth, that God was a Protestant, and that the Prussian Protestant state had a special role in the world and in history to establish the kingdom of God on earth. So when Prussia was fighting its military rivals, such as the Catholic states of Austria and the small papal states of Italy, then this wasn't just realpolitik, this was doing the will of God. And famously, the Prussian army, on their belt buckles, the soldiers had inscribed, "God is on our side." Now in 1848, many of the national liberals and national republicans gathered in the German assembly in Frankfurt had hoped that Prussia would come to their aid and free them from Austria, but this didn't happen, and they felt betrayed. So a further element came into the mix here, that Germans were martyred. Not only were they doing the work of God, when eventually the German nation becomes fused with the Prussian state, that happens later, it happens after 1848. But the three elements are here now, of German specialness, of the ancient and pure racial roots of the Germans in Nordic culture, and as represented by Nordic mythology, as presented by Wagner in his operas, and thirdly, the Hegelian idea that Prussia had a special mission in the world, to conquer the whole world actually, and establish a new state in the name of Protestantism, which was the true form of Christianity, the only true form of Christianity.